The Constitution isn't going to save you because an old document can't enforce itself, and when half of the country stops even pretending to respect what it says, you have crossed a Rubicon that you cannot uncross. No Constitution, no Bill of Rights, no procedures, checks, and balances will protect you from the left anymore. They do not need any precedent to do what they want. They do not need our permission to aggressively use power to advance their agenda, and that is a reality that we had better wake up to and fast. You're listening to The Conservative Rebel. Today's episode of The Conservative Rebel is based on an article I recently published on my Substack. Go to the Evan Dish Substack and you can subscribe there for free and get all of this content before it's even made into podcasts, early and totally free. Takes just a few seconds to do, and the link will be in the description for that. Now let's get back to the episode. In America, we like to think our Constitution makes tyranny impossible. We like to believe that our system of checks and balances and separation of powers is a foolproof defense against totalitarianism. We like to tell ourselves that our Bill of Rights magically guarantees that our basic freedoms can never be taken away. The government, however horrible it can get, can never descend into communism. No matter how evil the people in power, we'll always be able to just vote them away. No matter how deep the hole we're thrown in, we'll always be able to dig ourselves out, using the approved mechanisms totally peacefully. If the leftist regimes of our fellow quote-unquote democracies in the Anglosphere and Europe are imprisoning dissidents en masse for online thought crimes, well, that's only because they don't have the First Amendment protecting free speech. If these democracies have outlawed self-defense, confiscated guns, banned knives, and, in some cases, even pepper spray, well, that's only because they don't have the Second Amendment saying that they're not allowed to do that. In America, you see, tyrannical overreach can never happen because it says on a piece of paper that it can't happen. In our country, the government can never revoke our freedoms because a bunch of dead guys in wigs said the government isn't allowed to revoke our freedoms 250 years ago. So we just have to trust the system, place our faith in our glorious democracy and incorruptible Constitution, and as long as we respect the procedures and the rules when we're in power, we can trust that the Democrats will when they're in power. And even if, as we trust is impossible, worst comes to worst, all the armed citizens, all the dreaded suburban Republican girl dads with their pistols and cargo shorts, will rally to save us. They'll be able to overcome the drones and the Patriot missiles and the hydrogen bombs and the tanks rolling through the streets. The women and children will just hunker down with the chickens and freeze dryers and garbanzo beans, and we'll all survive the apocalypse together. That's the plan, anyway. That's how we will win the inevitable civil war that everyone's talking about. That's how we will defeat the left, as everyone thinks is so inevitable. This is what the Second Amendment is for. Don't mess with America. Meanwhile, back in the world of reality, the fact of the matter is that our Constitution is dead. And it has been dead for a long time. I don't say that with any pleasure. I don't say that happily. I say that to be realistic. Our current system of government doesn't remotely resemble what our founders intended. That's just a fact. to them, it would be completely unrecognizable. It's not just that it's a little more powerful than they envisioned. It's not just that we have a little more gun control or whatever than they wanted. It's a totally different system. It is fundamentally different. It's not that the system has changed, it's that the system has been replaced with a different system. That is how radical things have changed. The founders set up a tiny federal government with just a small handful of powers, and so small that they listed them all in minute detail in the Constitution. Literally everything the government was allowed to do was listed by name in the Constitution. And if you're wondering just how minute the details were, the founders literally felt the need to list such obvious things as running a post office in the document. Everything that wasn't explicitly given to the federal government was left to the states or the people. That's what the 10th Amendment to the Constitution is about. It explicitly says this. People will say, oh, this is just your neo-Confederate states' rights interpretation. Historians disagree. The 10th Amendment literally says this, okay? Go read it. And whenever the government went beyond these specifically enumerated powers, the states could flat out disobey the new law and declare it null and void within their territory. And they did that for decades. The North did it, the South did it, everyone did it. Needless to say, that's not the type of country we live in anymore. That's not the Constitution we have. Because since the 1860s, America has gone from a loose union of sovereign states to one consolidated superstate ruled from Washington, D.C., with power over our lives that King George III and the British Empire we just celebrated our independence from couldn't even have imagined in their wildest dreams. The checks and balances and armed citizenry and all of these foolproof reassurances and insurance policies, in other words, they failed to prevent this degeneration. It didn't work out. The government managed to completely transform itself and give itself an insane amount of power anyway, because people went along with it. The government has ignored the Constitution for over 160 years. Hot take, but it's true. And its power has only grown exponentially, decade by decade, over that time frame. It's more powerful now than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it was more powerful than it was 40 years ago. 40 years ago, it was more powerful than it was 100 years ago. It's constantly acquiring more power that the Constitution is supposed to prevent it from having. It's simply a fact that we are currently living in a post-constitutional order. We are currently living in a non-republican form of government, non-lowercase r republican. This is not the republic we're supposed to live in. And even if none of this were true, the left would still not care at all about the Constitution. They do not care about it in the slightest. They do not intend to abide by its restrictions at all when they're in power, and they have proven it again and again and again. Why else did the Biden regime raid Donald Trump's house and drag him before kangaroo courts in an attempt to imprison him while he was running for president? That is literally what third world countries do. That is what the Soviet Union did. That is what communist countries do. But we did it. We saw the political opposition be persecuted like this. And then when all that failed, Trump was coincidentally subjected to 2 assassination attempts under extremely suspicious circumstances during that same election cycle. Why else did the left imprison hundreds of their political opponents, including peaceful pro-life activists and January 6th protesters? Why did they suspend the basic civil liberties and constitutional rights of Americans who refused to inject themselves with the COVID vaccine? There are just too many examples of the Democrats' blatant authoritarianism to count. And if you don't think that the next leftist administration, if there is another one, God forbid, is going to make the Biden regime look like a laissez-faire libertarian regime the next time they seize power, then consider this your wake-up call. Mainstream Democrats, including the 2028 presidential contenders Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris, have openly announced their intentions to pack the Supreme Court with leftist judges in order to, quote, consolidate power. That's what Gavin Newsom said. They've also openly discussed creating 2 new blue states out of Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., to give themselves 4 more senators, more members of Congress, and more electoral votes. And then, of course, the most effective strategy of all, the Democrats' favorite, throwing open the borders to import millions of new voters from the Third World. And this is just the moderate mainstream. Meanwhile, let's check in on the Democratic Socialists of America, who, as you know, are currently in the process of completely taking over the Democrat Party, which is already communist enough. They recently released a new manifesto, maybe you've seen the headlines about it, calling for the abolition of the Senate and the Electoral College, and ending the Supreme Court and presidency as we know them by making them subservient to the all-powerful Congress. They did not propose doing this by constitutional amendment, which is what the Constitution requires to make such a sweeping change. No, they're just going to do it, because they don't care what the Constitution says. All they care about is rigging the entire system to benefit their party. The left, both in the mainstream and on the fringes, wants to fundamentally restructure our entire system of government to give themselves a monopoly on political power and ensure Republicans can never win again. And they're openly bragging about it. No Constitution, no Bill of Rights, no procedures, checks, and balances will protect you from the left. They do not need any precedent to do what they want. They do not need our permission to aggressively use power to advance their agenda. So I'm done hearing from Senator John Thune and the other doormat Republicans about how we can't end the filibuster to pass voter ID because of the precedent it would set for the Democrats to do the same. I'm done hearing about how we can't crack down on Antifa and violent leftist terrorists because then the left might retaliate in the future. I'm done hearing about how we need to roll back the deportations and put a leash on ICE to appease people who hate us and are openly committed to our destruction. The left will do it anyway. They do not need our precedence or our permission for anything. So Republicans need to ask themselves a very important question. Are they willing to actually use power to advance their agenda? Or will they continue cowering in the corner, terrified to do anything, lest they provoke the left into being the authoritarians they're already fully and openly committed to being? The answer Republicans give to that question will decide nothing less than the fate of our country. Thanks for listening to today's episode of The Conservative Rebel. If you enjoyed it, please remember to follow the show and follow my Substack, where you can get all of this content before it's even made into podcasts, days or even a week before the podcast listeners get it. It's free, it's fast to do, and it would help out a lot. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.